Restoring a Bike Part 3. Hi guys, I'm Dan at vintagevelo.org and today is the third and final part in our Restoring a Bike series. Now, those of you should know by now we've been working on this French Bertin race bike for a few weeks. Part 1, we stripped it down and praised the parts. Part 2, we tackled the horrendous paintwork, and now in Part 3 we have the frame and forks ready to go. And we can build this bike back up. Now, the pearlescent paint here has had a few weeks to harden up, and it's ready to go, so it's really come out pretty well. I had a couple of little sinkage issues here and there, but I've flatted those back and polished them up, and generally I'm pretty pleased with the outcome. I've been through the Shimano 600 parts that came on the bike. They've all cleaned up pretty well. I've refreshed a lot of parts in there as well. At the end of this video, we will also count up the cost of how much it's cost to get it to this point. Okay. Now, we've got a few parts already fitted on the bike, but what we're going to do, we're going to go ahead and we're just going to start assembling. I'm going to start at the front end there with the headset and forks. That's the Shimano 600 headset back on there. It really just needed a good cleanup and re-grease. The original parts were all pretty good, and I'm not anticipating too many assembly issues on the bike because almost all of these parts came off the bike, so going back on hopefully should be fine. But that's on there now. Time to get that bottom bracket on there. So I'm now just going to go ahead and assemble the bottom bracket. When you do that, just check your spindle. Normally one side of the spindle is slightly longer than the other. On the Shimano 600 here, it's about 1mm longer on one side, and that's the drive side for the crank to go on. Also, when you're popping on your bearings, a nice bit of fresh grease on there, and the kind of ball side, for one of rather than the captive side, faces inwards onto the actual spindle. And the bit with the cage sits on the outside. Easy one to get that one mixed up, but we'll just go ahead and yep, that's gone on there pretty nicely. Now, and a good example of why I like to use a very durable 2K lacquer is because my big drive side spanner jumped off as I was doing it up nice and tight and twanged into the fresh paintwork, which fortunately took the blow nicely, which is why always good to use decent 2K lacquer. That would definitely have chipped and taken off anything that wasn't nice and durable. Anyway, let's go ahead and get the cranks on there. Here we have the original Shimano 600 crank set. It cleaned up really nicely, but on first inspection the wear wasn't that much, so it cleaned up nicely. I just stripped it all apart and degreased it and gave it a little bit of a polish. We've got a 52 tooth outer chainring, 44 on the inner. Not a lot of wear on either, so we're just going to go ahead and pop this straight back on. Always good, a little handy tip, as I mentioned earlier, with the drive side of the bottom bracket. When you pop this back on, just check before you crank it right up that it's not the wrong way around by mistake, and it's going to just pull straight into your fresh paintwork. You know, that's one of those mistakes you really only make once. They're on there and they're spinning really nicely, so that's good. On with the look pedals, the early, I think these are early deltas or something like that, but I have adjusted them. They now feel like they're going to work nicely, so we're going to get those back on there. And again, the Shimano 600 brakes that came off, they were in really good condition. All I've done is give them a nice clean degrease, fresh oil and grease on there, and some new pads because the pads were shot. We'll set those up once we've got them on the wheels. I'm not going to over tighten these up to start off with until I've got the wheels on there, and then I can get it kind of all set in alignment where I want it before I tighten anything down. Derailleur time now. As I mentioned in the strip down video, the Shimano 600 again in really good condition. We had a little bit of drag on the pulleys, so I've just pulled those apart, cleaned all the old grease and crud off and re-greased and reassembled, and I'm going to pop these on here. Front derailleur's got on. It's a band on, so you clamp it on to the actual frame. So with that kind of thing, put them on, but don't over tighten them at this point, because what I want to do, I want to get the chain on there once it's all ready, get it all aligned up, make sure it's in the right position before I tighten it down, because obviously fresh paint and there's a chance it could gouge into it. So if I'm moving it around, I want that in the right place at the right time. Well, we're making some good progress. One problem I did have when riding the Bertin before restoring it was that we had a bit of ghost shifting and miss shifting on maybe gears 2, 3, 4 around there on the Shimano STI system. Now, these early STIs are not rebuildable. You can't get into them. They're kind of sealed. It doesn't really work like that. Campagnolos, you can. The ergo levers are a bit more user-friendly like that. But these early Shimano items are not. However, I did read about a hack that if you leave the cable in there and pull on it, you can absolutely bathe it with spray oil from behind, get it right in there, and then work it backwards and forwards on the levers, clicking it through time and time again, oiling and oiling and oiling, and that can sometimes solve the problem. It's basically really old grease getting in the way that's caked on. Now, I've done that. Whether it works or not, I don't know. Not going to find out until it's all built up. But if that doesn't work, I'm just going to have to buy another one. Obviously not new, but try and get one in as good as condition as possible. But we'll see what happens a little later. Yep, that's roughly in position, but we'll clamp that down fully once we've got the wheels on and all the alignments correctly. Wheel time now. Gone is that near straight cut rear block, and we've gone for a much more knee-friendly 11 to 25, so it's going to be a lot more user-friendly on the climbs on this. Now, I did have a bit of a fight and a wrestle with the rear hub on that 100-kilometer clunker challenge I did on this before the restoration work. The rear hub was breaking down badly. It was clicking, grinding, knocking. It was really, really bad, and it got worse and worse. So I stripped it down, cleaned it out, re-greased it. Didn't make a lot of difference. So I put fresh bearings in there. Didn't make much difference. Still really bad. So I changed the threaded races on the axles. That was what the problem was, with 2 new ones of those on there. It's now back to being really, really smooth and good. Also gone are the horrendously rock hard zero grip, zero feel tyres, and we've got a lovely set of fresh 23mm Veloflex Corsa clinchers on here, and they are really, really good tyres. So they're really grippy. They're going to be really nice. It give me a lot of feedback. Can't wait to see how this bike rides with decent rubber. That's the wheels and chain back on here now. The chain popped straight back on. It was a new chain for the previous ride, and using the quick links, that popped straight on and straight off, so that was nice and straightforward. I'm going to go ahead and run the new cables now. Interestingly, we've got an internal cable run on the top tube here, and a sign of good quality, they've actually put a bent tube, a curved tube, all the way down the inside of the frame and brazed that in place. So it's not just rattling loose in there or just a drilled hole. It's actually got a guide going all the way through the frame. Always good to see. So we're going to go ahead and get the Jaguar cables on here and roughly set up. So that's the brake cables all on there. Brakes are working nicely, but we will check again before we take it out on the shakedown ride. I'm about to put the shift cables on now, but before I do that, on these early type STI Shimano levers, the cables come out of the side of the actual lever, so it's much easier to put the handlebar tape on before we put the cables on for that. And as ever, my usual trick, a little bit of tubular double-sided tape on the main parts of the bars. I put that on before I put the tape on. Just gives a little bit of extra bite, extra grip on that tape so as it doesn't unwind if I am ever trying to put in any efforts. To be fair, more by guesswork than judgment, the indexing went pretty well. A couple of quick adjustments and it just fell in place. Sometimes you get lucky, and it certainly feels like the oiling blast hack on the front shifter seems to have worked, but I won't know for definite until I get this out there on the road. Couple of small parts left to put on and then we can count the great. So the vintage Bertin is now complete. The 3-part restoring a bike series is done, and here we have it. I'm sure you'll all agree it looks excellent. No green splodges in sight. The white pearlescent paint is exactly the right paint for it. Should have always been looking like this in my mind, factory fresh. Now the bike is ready to go. It's indexing nicely, it's braking nicely, but I will double check all the nuts and bolts before I take it out on its first shakedown ride. Always be careful on that one. And it's time to count the cost. It's fair to say I didn't skimp on any of the parts on here, especially the tyres. Top of the range Veloflex always cost, but hey, tyres keep you upright on the road, so I think that's very important. Looking at the costs, would do this in sterling first. The bike itself, £70, a bargain, but barely working at that and not really rideable. Bearings, races, things like that, £35. Tyres and tubes, £90. The chain, I bought that for the last ride, but it was new, that was £10. Cable set, £10. Bar tape, £10. The free hub on the back, £20. Now paint, I use 3 cans and including taxes and shipping comes in about £20 a can, so that's £60, and the decals were £45. That comes to a grand total of £350. If you're in Europe, that is €385, and for our US friends, roughly $420. Now I think that's a bargain for a bike that looks like this, and hopefully it rides as good as it looks. Now I do encounter guys that, you know, put in $100 and turn a bike around. You know, kudos to them. But for me, this is about the minimum I would do and spend to a bike like this to really give me confidence that it's going to be a great bike to ride. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that series. Do like and subscribe for anything that's cool to do with vintage bikes, bike riding and bike chat. And as soon as it warms up, we will get out there and repeat the clunker challenge, 100 kilometers on a cheap vintage bike. It's not as cheap as it was when I first did that last year, but there we go. Thanks a lot and see you soon.